Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
This all started back when the pandemic was still going strong. I was desperately looking for work since my previous job had to shut down, and I finally landed a position at this family-owned Italian restaurant downtown. The place looked decent enough from the outside, but I should have seen the red flags during my interview when the manager kept emphasizing how they were like family and expected total dedication. The job itself was pretty straightforward. I was officially hired as a cashier, but since it was such a small operation, I basically did everything a server would do too. The pay was $9 an hour, which wasn't great, but I needed something. The restaurant was always dead though. Most of my shifts were spent sitting at the table with the two cooks, scrolling through my phone and waiting for someone to actually walk through the door or for an order to pop up on the tablet. The manager was this guy who acted like he was running some five-star establishment instead of a nearly empty restaurant that barely got any customers. His wife worked there too, and she was pregnant at the time. They both had this attitude like they were doing everyone a huge favor by giving them a job, even though the place was clearly struggling. Things were going okay for a few months, nothing special, but I was getting by. Then my life started falling apart all at once. First, my last surviving grandparent passed away, which hit me really hard since we were close. Then my mom got diagnosed with cancer, which was terrifying. On top of that, she randomly lost half her hearing overnight, and the doctors couldn't figure out why. All of this happened within about 4 months, and I was barely holding it together. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, I got a call from my aunt in early September. My uncle had been in a rehab facility for over a year after having a stroke, and his health had been going up and down. Two of my aunts and another uncle had been able to visit him recently, but he'd taken a turn for the worse. My aunt called to break the terrible news that my uncle had passed away that morning. I felt like the wind got knocked out of me. It had been a couple of years since I'd seen him last, but I remembered how he'd promised me after my graduation that we'd go to this fancy restaurant in town to celebrate. We never got the chance. I told my aunt I needed to know when the services would be so I could let my job know and get the time off. She said she'd let me know as soon as the family had everything planned, since they were still figuring out all the details. Over the next few days, my manager kept asking me for updates about the funeral. I felt horrible calling my aunt repeatedly because she'd just lost her brother, but my boss kept getting on my case about it. He kept telling me he needed to know as soon as possible, so he could figure out the schedule, and I kept explaining that I was still waiting to hear back, because my family was still making arrangements. He kept saying we couldn't just have people calling out last minute. Finally, my aunt called me back with the date and time. I thanked her and told her I'd see her there, then immediately went to tell my manager that the funeral would be next Tuesday and I'd need that day off. My manager looked at me like I'd just asked for a month-long vacation and told me I couldn't miss that day because I'd have no coverage. In all my years of working, I'd never had a boss tell me I couldn't go to a family member's funeral. I told him that there was nothing stopping me from going, especially not this job. That's when he brought his pregnant wife over, and she immediately jumped in to back him up. His wife started lecturing me about how everyone has their issues and struggles, including my co-workers, herself, and me too. She said I needed to learn to shove all of that down and not take it to the workplace. Here I was dealing with death, cancer, and a family crisis, and this woman was telling me to just suck it up because she was pregnant and dealing with her own problems. I told her that if she was going through every single thing I'd been through these past few months while being pregnant, she'd be a crying mess, so I didn't want to hear it. She didn't back down. She said she was sorry for my loss, but I still couldn't miss work. That was it for me. I'd had enough of their complete lack of compassion and basic human decency. I finished about half of my closing duties, counted the money from the register like always, wrote everything on the envelope, showed it to the security camera like they required, grabbed my stuff, and walked out without saying another word. I wasn't even 2 minutes down the road when my phone started ringing. It was the wife calling, but I just ignored it and blocked her number. I was done with both of them. The next morning I was supposed to be in at 11 a.m., but instead of my alarm waking me up, it was my mom pounding on my bedroom door asking what was going on because I was supposed to be at work. They'd called my mom to tell her I was a no-show and that I'd quit. When I explained what had happened, my mom looked at me like I was being unreasonable, but I stood my ground. Some things are more important than a $9 an hour job at a restaurant that barely had any customers. I went to my uncle's funeral and said goodbye properly. It meant everything to be there with my family during that difficult time. Meanwhile, my former bosses were probably scrambling to figure out how to run their empty restaurant without me. About 6 months later, I was driving past the restaurant and noticed it was completely empty. Not just no customers, but actually closed down. The building had a for lease sign in the window. Their complete lack of business, which was already a problem when I worked there, finally caught up with them. They probably couldn't afford to keep the place running, especially after treating their employees like garbage. I found out later from one of the cooks who I'd stayed in touch with that they'd had a hard time finding anyone to replace me. Word had gotten around about how they'd treated me, and nobody wanted to work for people who wouldn't let their employees attend family funerals. The few people who did try working there didn't last long once they saw how the owners operated. I work as an IT specialist for a local company, which means I'm on call sometimes and need my sleep when I can get it. I also have an elderly mother who visits twice a week, and she has mobility issues, so having clear access to my driveway isn't just convenient, it's necessary. My neighbor moved in about 6 months after I did. From day one, she made it clear that she believed the entire street revolved around her. She'd leave her trash cans right in front of my yard, like she was marking her territory. Every night around 11 or midnight, she'd walk her small, yappy dog right past everyone's bedroom windows. The dog would bark at everything, shadows, leaves, other dogs 3 blocks away. But the worst part was her car situation. She had this beat-up sedan that she treated like it was a luxury vehicle. She'd park it half on the sidewalk and half on my lawn, crushing my grass and making it impossible for people to walk by safely. I tried to be understanding at first. Maybe she didn't realize. The real problem started when she began parking directly in front of my driveway. Not just close to it, completely blocking it. I come home from work to find I couldn't even get into my own garage. The first few times, I knocked on her door politely. I asked her nicely if she could move her car because it was blocking my driveway. She told me she was just running inside for a minute. I explained that I needed to get my car in right then and asked if she could move it now. She repeated that she was only going to be a minute and asked if I couldn't just wait. This happened over and over. Sometimes I'd wait an hour for her to come out. Other times I'd have to park on the street and walk 3 blocks because every spot was taken. When my mother came to visit, she couldn't even get close to the house. After about 2 months of this, I decided to be more direct. I told her she needed to stop parking in front of my driveway because it was illegal and making my life really difficult. That's when I saw her true colors for the first time. She got angry and started yelling about how she pays her taxes just like everyone else and can park wherever she wants on a public street. I pointed out that she wasn't on the street but was actually blocking my driveway. She screamed that this was America and she had rights. I agreed that she had rights, but told her that one of my rights was access to my own property. She got even madder and told me not to lecture her about rights because she'd lived in the neighborhood longer than me. She stormed off, slamming her door so hard I thought the frame might crack. I stood there for a moment wondering what I got myself into. Things escalated from there. She started parking in my driveway even when she wasn't going anywhere just to prove a point. She'd leave her trash cans directly behind my car so I couldn't back out. When I moved them, she'd walk over and move them back, claiming I was touching her property. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning. I had an important client meeting and I needed to leave by 7:30. I went out to my garage at 7:15 to find her car parked directly across my driveway. Not just blocking it, she'd actually pulled into my driveway and parked sideways, making it impossible for me to get out even if I tried to maneuver around. I knocked on her door but got no answer. I knocked louder, but still nothing. I could see lights on inside and hear her television. She was ignoring me on purpose. I called her phone and it went straight to voicemail. I was going to be late for the biggest presentation of my career because this woman wanted to play games. That's when I decided enough was enough. I called the towing company. I told the tow truck driver that a car was completely blocking my driveway and I couldn't get out. He said they'd be there in 20 minutes. The tow truck arrived and loaded up her car without any drama. I watched from my window as they drove away, finally feeling like I'd taken back some control. I managed to make it to my meeting on time and actually landed the client. I was sitting in my living room catching up on emails when I heard the screech of tires outside. I looked out the window just in time to see a different car, her husband's truck, slam directly into the side of my house. The impact shook the entire structure. Pictures fell off walls. My coffee mug shattered on the floor. I ran outside, my heart pounding. The truck had left a massive dent in my siding and knocked over my mailbox. Before I could even process what had happened, she climbed out of the driver's seat and started walking toward me. She screamed at me, asking what I had done. I asked her what I had done when she was the one who just crashed into my house. She yelled that this was payback for towing her car and called me a weasel. I asked if she was insane because you can't just ram your car into someone's house. She shouted that I had no right to tow her car. I told her she was blocking my driveway and it was my property. That's when I noticed she was carrying a baseball bat. My blood went cold. This woman had just intentionally crashed a vehicle into my house, and now she was approaching me with a weapon. I didn't stick around to see what she planned to do with it. I ran inside and locked the door behind me. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my gun from the bedroom safe. I bought it for home protection after a string of break-ins in the area, but I never thought I'd need it for a neighbor dispute. I wasn't planning to shoot her, I just wanted to scare her off. I positioned myself at my front window and fired 3 shots into the air, well away from where she was standing. The noise was deafening, but it had the desired effect. She dropped the bat and ran back to the truck like her hair was on fire. When she was trying to speed away, 2 police cars came screaming down the street. Someone must have called about the crash or the gunshots. They blocked her in before she could escape. The officers shouted for her to put her hands where they could see them and get out of the vehicle. She tried to argue with them, claiming I was the aggressor, but the evidence spoke for itself. There was a truck-shaped dent in my house, a baseball bat on my lawn, and multiple witnesses who had seen the whole thing. After hours of questions and paperwork, the police arrested her for reckless driving, property damage, and criminal threatening. When they put her in the back of the patrol car, she was still screaming about her rights and how unfair everything was. That's when things got interesting. During the investigation, the police discovered she had outstanding warrants for similar incidents in other towns. Apparently, this wasn't her first rodeo. She'd been banned from 3 different grocery stores for screaming at employees. She'd been arrested twice for blocking other people's driveways in her previous neighborhood. There was even a restraining order filed by her former neighbor for harassment. The local news picked up the story, and suddenly everyone in town knew about my crazy neighbor. The headline read, "Local woman arrested after crashing into neighbor's house over towing dispute." People I'd never met started stopping me on the street to share their own stories about dealing with entitled neighbors. The court case was a circus. She represented herself, which was a mistake from the start. She spent most of her time ranting about her constitutional rights and how everyone was persecuting her. The judge looked increasingly annoyed when witness after witness testified about her behavior. Her husband took the stand and admitted that she'd taken his truck without permission. My other neighbors testified about the trash cans, the late-night dog walking, and the constant parking violations. Even the grocery store manager showed up to talk about the incidents at his store. The evidence was overwhelming. Security camera footage from my house showed her deliberately steering into my siding. The baseball bat had her fingerprints on it. There were dozens of photos of her car blocking various driveways over the past year. When the judge delivered the verdict, the courtroom was dead silent. The judge found her guilty on all charges. Given the pattern of behavior and the serious nature of these crimes, he sentenced her to 18 months in county jail. followed by 2 years of probation. She would also be required to attend anger management classes and pay full restitution for the property damage. She exploded when she heard the sentence, screaming about corruption and unfair treatment until the bailiff had to restrain her. When they led her away in handcuffs, she was still yelling threats at me. The neighborhood has been peaceful ever since. Her husband moved away while she was in jail, and the house sold to a nice family with young kids. My ex and I divorced 2 years ago. It wasn't pretty, but we tried to keep things civil for our 8-year-old son. My ex started dating this woman about 2 years ago, and she has 2 daughters from her previous marriage. The whole blended family thing has been really hard on my son. He's been struggling with the changes, going back and forth between 2 houses, dealing with new people in his life, and trying to understand why mommy and daddy can't be together anymore. I noticed my son was having a tough time, so I got him into therapy about a year ago. It's been helping, but these things take time. My ex doesn't really believe in therapy. He thinks kids should just toughen up and deal with things. So last weekend was the big wedding day. My ex was marrying his girlfriend, and my son was supposed to be there as part of the wedding party. The night before, my son seemed fine when I dropped him off at his dad's house. But the next morning, my ex called me to tell me that our son was sick. He said our son's stomach hurt really bad, and he thought he was going to throw up. When I asked if he had actually thrown up, my ex said yes, and that our son looked pretty pale too. He thought it was best if our son stayed home. I agreed and hoped our son would feel better soon. So they got a babysitter to stay with my son and went to the wedding. Everything seemed normal until later that afternoon when my ex came home to check on him. My son was running around the house playing video games and acting completely normal. The babysitter told my ex that once everyone left for the wedding, my son suddenly felt much better and had been fine all day. When my ex confronted him, my son broke down and admitted he had faked being sick. He even admitted to fake throwing up by making gagging sounds in the bathroom. My ex was furious. He grounded my son for a month and told him he wouldn't be having any fun since he had missed such an important day. Then came the exchange day when my son was supposed to come back to my house. My ex sent me this incredibly long email detailing everything that happened and demanding that I continue the punishment at my house so my son would be grounded for 4 consecutive weeks instead of it being spread over 2 months. When I got my son home, I sat him down for a real heart-to-heart conversation. I asked him to tell me why he didn't want to go to the wedding. My son explained that he didn't want his dad to get married. He said he didn't want her to be his stepmom forever, and he didn't want her daughters to be his sisters. When I told him that must feel really scary and confusing, he agreed and said everything kept changing and he just wanted things to go back to how they were. I immediately called his therapist, and she was able to see him that week. They had a really good session, where my son was able to express all his feelings about the changes happening in his life. After thinking about it, I decided not to continue the grounding at my house. Instead, I wanted to focus on helping my son work through his emotions in a healthy way. So I called my ex to let him know. I told my ex that I had talked to our son and gotten him into therapy, and that I wasn't going to continue the grounding at my house. My ex was shocked and angry, demanding to know why I wouldn't back him up on this. I explained that I understood he was upset, but I thought our son needed help processing his emotions, not punishment. His new wife got on the phone and she had plenty of opinions. Karen told me that my son had disrespected both of them and their daughters by missing their special day. She said he needed to learn that actions have results. When I tried to explain that I understood they were hurt, but that he was 8 years old and struggling with major life changes, she said she didn't care how old he was. She told me that if her daughters had done something like this, they would be punished at both houses, and that I wasn't being a good co-parent. My ex jumped back in and said she was right. He said that our son had never told him he was having these problems. I reminded him that our son actually had told him about his struggles. I brought up how 2 years ago, our son had said he didn't want his dad to have a girlfriend, and my ex had told him he needed to stop being a baby about it. My ex brushed this off, saying that was different and that our son was just being difficult back then. Karen got even more aggressive and accused me of teaching our son that he could manipulate situations to get what he wanted. She asked what would happen if he decided he didn't want to come to her daughter's events, wondering if I would just let him skip those too. I explained that I was teaching him that he could talk to me about his feelings and we would work through them together. I mentioned that I had even delayed my own relationship because I wanted to make sure he was ready for those changes. Karen was outraged by this and asked if I was saying they should have waited to get married until my son was ready. She said that was ridiculous and that he didn't get to control their lives. I told her that I was simply saying children need time and support to adjust to major changes. Karen snapped back that she thought I was making a huge mistake and told me not to come crying to them when my son started thinking he could get away with anything. The conversation ended with both of them calling me names and hanging up on me. About a week later, I got a call from my son's school. The secretary explained that Karen had called the school demanding to know why my son had been absent the day after the wedding. She wanted to make sure I wasn't enabling him by letting him stay home. The school secretary was confused because my son hadn't been absent. When Karen insisted he should have been grounded and not allowed to go to school, the secretary had to explain that keeping a child home from school as punishment could be considered educational neglect. The secretary told me that Karen had started yelling about how I was undermining her authority and that she was now the child's stepmother and should have a say in his education. The school called me to clarify the situation, and I explained everything. They were actually concerned about Karen's behavior and noted it in my son's file. 2 weeks later, my ex called me, and he sounded embarrassed. He asked if we could talk, and when I agreed, he told me that Karen had been difficult lately. He explained that she had been trying to control everything about our son's time at their house. She wanted our son to call her mom and treat her daughters like real sisters immediately. When I asked how our son was handling that, my ex admitted it wasn't going well. He said our son had been having meltdowns every time he came to their house. He also admitted that he was starting to think I was right about the therapy thing. It turns out that Karen had been pressuring my son to get over his feelings and accept their new family immediately. She had been making him write apology letters to her daughters and forcing him to participate in family activities where he had to pretend to be happy. My son finally broke down and told his dad everything that had been happening. When my ex tried to talk to Karen about backing off, she lost it and started screaming about how he needed to choose between his new family and his son. My ex said that he thought he had made a mistake rushing into the marriage. He told me that Karen had said if he didn't make our son fall in line, she was going to make things really difficult. When I asked what he was going to do, he said he was going to start bringing our son to therapy sessions, and that he thought Karen and he needed some counseling too. 3 months later, my ex filed for divorce from Karen. She had been just as controlling and demanding with him as she had been trying to be with our son. The final straw was when she tried to take my son's phone away for a month because he had called me crying after she forced him to call her mom in front of her friends. Karen tried to fight for custody rights as a stepmother, but since the marriage lasted less than a year and she had no legal relationship to my son, she had no case. My son is doing much better now. He and his dad have started having regular therapy sessions together, and my ex has learned to actually listen when our son talks about his feelings. We've also started co-parenting counseling to make sure we're on the same page going forward. Karen has been telling everyone who will listen that I stole her stepson and ruined her marriage. She tried to contact my son's school again to complain about me, but they told her she had no legal standing and asked her to stop calling. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.